Welcome to the Affiliated Monitors Expert Podcast, hosted by Tom Fox on the Compliance Podcast Network. Today I have with me Eric Feldman. Eric is the Senior Vice President at Affiliated Monitors, and we're going to visit on independent assessments of candidates, the whys, the whats, and the hows. Eric, first of all, thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
My pleasure, Tom.
So, Eric, I guess we could just start with what kinds of things should companies look for when doing mergers and acquisition due diligence?
Sure. Well, it's very interesting to us when we conduct independent assessments of companies that have gone through mergers or acquisitions, or do monitoring work of companies that have been through an M&A. We notice that most of the issues, or many of the issues that we see in companies post M&A, come from the target company, come from the company that they originally acquired or merged with. And the issues emanate from a lack of attention to a number of different things. First of all, the DOJ requirements, and we'll go into that in a moment, require a company going through an M&A to identify, to the extent that they can, any unreported misconduct that has occurred in the target company. To do that, there needs to be some kind of an assessment. You have to also identify the risk of additional misconduct having occurred or occurring in the future, and taking appropriate steps to prevent and detect that from happening, and for the company to establish processes for preventing and detecting misconduct once the acquisition or mergers occur. Now, the kinds of things that a company can look for during that pre-acquisition due diligence process and risk assessment really are fairly simple. We need to look for whether or not the company has a code of conduct, what that code of conduct might look like. Look at the ethics and compliance officer, the CECO, as we often call that individual, and whether they have the independence, the authority, and the resources to do the job effectively. Is it real? Third thing I think that a company would want to look for is whether there's an anonymous reporting hotline, something that is a requirement from the SEC and the DOJ. You might want to take a look at board minutes to determine if that ethics and compliance officer is having contact with that board. Are they briefing the board? Is the board providing leadership and oversight? And then you'd want to just ask for basic policies. Does the company that you are planning on acquiring or merging with have very simple things that you would expect them to have, like an anti-retaliation policy, an anti-harassment policy, and really, most importantly, an anti-corruption policy that has been effectively implemented. You would be surprised to know that there are a number of instances that we have seen out there where the acquiring company has failed to even ask for these fundamental and basic documents to determine if that company has done its due diligence to prevent corruption and misconduct.
Eric, you outlined some structural issues that should be explored, but let me turn it now to what specific types of questions would you advise a company who's looking at a potential target to ask?
Well, one of the things you want to try to get at is the culture of the company. And to understand whether the company has, previous to your involvement with them, been committed to creating and ethical and compliant culture, because that, in my view, is a fundamental internal control without which there probably is a greater risk that misconduct has occurred and might occur in the future without some intervention. So one of the questions that I would ask right up front would be whether there is a performance management system, including hiring, promotions, and bonus determinations, that's based on ethics and compliance factors in addition to financial factors. In other words, are decisions that are made on promotions and bonuses in particular properly aligned with the company's code of conduct and core values relating to ethical culture? I might also want to ask whether the company has done engagement surveys in the past and get copies of those engagement surveys, because they could be good indicators, or although they're not foolproof, they could be a fairly good indicator about employee morale, which can give you some red flags about whether the environment within the company is one that has tolerated harassment or bullying, things that you look for as red flags of a challenged ethical culture. And the employees will also tell you to what extent they feel comfortable talking to their managers and reporting issues. If they've never done an employee survey, I would think that you would want to look a lot further on the first several things that I talked about in terms of policies and procedures, and then get a sense of what is the company's capability to respond to allegations of misconduct, and do they have a professional and independent investigative capability internally to do that? If they don't, I think that there are other questions that might need to be asked, and it is a red flag that there might be a problem.
Eric, one of the things that bedevils anyone in the M&A world is the lack of time in the pre-acquisition process. You never have enough time to look at everything you want, whether that be looking at financial records, whether that be looking at ethics and compliance records, whether it be testing an ethical culture. Obviously, confidential information is a very important part of the pre-acquisition process. But how would you advise a company who is constrained on because of whatever reason, whether it's regulation, whether it's law, whether it's resources, from being able to do really a full assessment to make a decision that they can then act upon and remediate if necessary going forward?
Well, yes, you're right, Tom. There are time constraints always in these kinds of things. There are also issues regarding limited access, that you might not have full access to the people and records that are necessary to do what you and I might consider to be a complete review. So in those cases, either identifying a third party that can come in and, in accordance with ethics and compliance best practices, provide a list of questions, ask the right questions of key people in the company while limiting access, and doing this in a very short time frame, can meet the DOJ's definition of doing appropriate risk-based due diligence. Within the Department of Justice deferred prosecution agreement template, one of the items that we know from past experience that DOJ focuses on is mergers and acquisitions. And in there, it says that the company will develop and implement policies and procedures for mergers and acquisitions, requiring the company to conduct appropriate risk-based due diligence on potential new business entities, including FCPA and anti-corruption due diligence. And to do that, you need a documented process And in our view, based on the work we've done, having an independent third party do this and document it can lower the risk that if there is a problem, the problem will at least be identified and the company can decide whether to go forward with the merger or acquisition or not. And if it's a very specific identification of misconduct, they can make a disclosure to the Department of Justice. And in any case, upon closing, they can remediate those issues and those control weaknesses that led to the problem in the first place.
Eric, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I've been visiting today with Eric Feldman, and we have been talking about the independent assessment of potential candidates in a mergers and acquisition. Eric, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I hope you've enjoyed this first part of our 5-part series on assessing ethics and compliance in mergers and acquisitions. I hope you'll join us tomorrow when we take a look at the impact that a merger and acquisition has on the merged company and the parent. This 5-part series is a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network.